Hello, everybody. My name's Ed Seay, and I'm interviewing Rob Dennis today. Rob is a audio professional, and he wears several hats, but is going to talk a lot about live recording, and that's what he's doing a whole lot of, and doing it at the absolute pro level, um, and has had lots of great clients, varied clients. Brian Wilson, Maren Morris, Casey Musgraves, Ted Nugent, Ashley McBride, Sam Hunt, Foreigner. I could go on, but that's pretty diverse. And
Yeah, it sounds funny to hear that.
yeah, it's like, wow, I did all that stuff. Hey,
Yeah.
Rob,
Hey, Ed, good to see you.
good to see you.
Welcome to the new world we're living in currently.
That's right. If you'll give us a background on where you started back in the high school days in Texas,
Sure.
and show us what led you here, because that's always an interesting. I think most of the guests for this class didn't just wake up out of the cocoon and say, that's exactly what I want to do. I know exactly what I want to do, and here's how to get there. Most people don't know. And so let me hear your story.
Yeah. Well, like so many people, I started out loving music from the time I was a kid. I started playing in rock bands at an early age, and I'm from West Texas, and we had the opportunity to start playing in clubs. It was West Texas. The oil boom was going on. So, from the time I was 14 years old till, probably like 18, I was playing in bars 2 or 3 nights a week, making really good money. But I was just the drummer. Our buddy was the sound guy. I knew nothing about what he was doing with the PA and the microphones. And, then that got me through high school. And then it was time to figure out what you wanted to do. And I signed up at our little community college. They had a recording program. And so, as I'm signing up for that recording program, I also got a job at a regional sound company. And so, this was Midland, Odessa. It's kind of a B market, but, this company was like the main sound provider for any of the, starting up touring acts that would all the up and coming Nashville acts would kind of pass through, and we would go to the local dive bar and, provide sound for them. That was a fantastic, more so than, so concurrently, two things are going on. I'm studying recording technology, plowing through all my books, and but I was getting the practical, which was way more helpful. I was, learning how to wire up amp racks and wire the console and pack the truck, tie the electrical in, all the things that you would learn at a sound company. So it was really good because I was getting the the knowledge that one gets in school, but at the same time I'm getting the practical, which I think made a huge difference. And then I'll tell a quick story that I know you like this one. At the time, this was the early 90s. The internet was nothing really but news groups. It was hard to get information. So we had Mix Magazine, and I didn't understand a word of it, but I knew it was an important resource. Our little bookstore in Midland, Texas would get 4 copies of Mix Magazine a month. So, I befriended the guy that ran the bookstore, and he would call me and say, hey, I've got a copy held back for you. So I would run in and nab one of the 4 copies that month. And, that was my only source of knowledge for the month, that and the textbooks I'd plowed through. So it was kind of hard to get information, which is not the case now, which makes me jealous. But that's kind of then plowed through college, got done with that degree, got the opportunity to move to Nashville and tour. So I spent the next, year and a half doing that.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
What? So you learned from, as far as the audio, the School of Hard Knocks was just on the job training.
Yeah, which honestly, getting the book knowledge is great, but somebody teaching you, this is how we do mic cables. This is how we do. And I was real fortunate because the guy was like a multimillionaire that owned this sound company. He really didn't care about making money. He just wanted to do everything right. Right. So I learned all of my habits were really good habits. Like, for instance, microphone cables, we used quad cable, so I learned early on 2 conductors, tying those together. For a microphone cable, it makes great RF reduction. The best gold Neutrik XLRs, the best, so from those tiny things, how we run the power down one side of the amp rack and all the audio goes down the other side. I was getting all of this. I never learned wrong, I guess is what I'm saying. I was fortunate that guy had figured out the best way to do everything, and that was my proving ground. So it was really fortunate.
Did you, during that period though, weren't you spending a lot of time recording anything that moved?
I was.
Anybody that...
I was. So I had alone, I think I spent, gosh, I can't remember now. It was either 5,000 or 10. I think it was 5. I couldn't afford it 10,000, but for $5,000, I believe I got a D88. That was an 8-track digital recorder, a 24-channel Tascam console, and a 2-track DAP machine. So I was in business. I had a large home I was renting, and so every night, I think I was making $5 an hour at that sound company, and so every night I would come home and I would record the local band, the aspiring church singer singing to a track, or but it was every night. I still have that calendar, and it's hilarious because every single night till 12 or 1, I was recording something. And then the sound company would send me out to record our local symphony and chorale pops, which was just stereo recording, a pair of 414 EBs real high in the air with a portable DAP machine. And that was great because it's very dynamic, those performances. And so, I mean, in the middle of West Texas, who would think I'm getting a world of recording knowledge and live sound knowledge. So by the time I moved to Nashville, I was ready.
Well, a lot of the acts that were coming through were kind of newbie acts, beginner acts, baby acts, as well. Who drifted on through your stable?
I'll never forget. There was a singer-songwriter named James House, Terry McBride of McBride and the Ride, a guy named George Dukas. They were all starter acts, all successful songwriters that have had long careers as songwriters, but they were trying to do the artist thing. All 3 of those guys, in a matter of 6 weeks, I would ask them about Nashville, and I think it was James House. He was like or George Dukas. I don't remember, but he said, "Oh, you should move there. You would do great." And man, I can't tell you, it like that breathed life into me. I kind of needed that. Like, they had kind of assessed my skills and thought, "Oh yeah, you can do this,"
Yeah.
And I'm like eternally grateful. Anytime I see any 3 of those guys, I still remind them. So, fast forward 3 months, I'm working for this country artist named John Michael Montgomery. He had a big run in the 90s, and, we're headlining arenas. All 3 of those acts were our openers over the course of that tour, that 12 months.
Uh-huh.
And so they all got to, they all got a kick out of that. Like, you did it, so that's what brought me to Nashville. I jumped on a tour, and moved to Nashville. It was the craziest thing I ever did. Moved 1,200 miles away.
Well, it was a good move for you. You got here, and did you jump back into this line of work, or stay in this line of work, or did you did you diversify, or what?
Yeah, so I was touring, and I was an eager beaver. I would soak up whatever the skill set was. I'm learning everything every day. I was that guy. I wanted to know what does the merch guy do? What does the lighting guy do? What does the electrician do? I was never sitting around. I was always helping somebody out and interested in the whole process. So after about a year of doing that, and this has been reoccurring. This is a personality thing with me. I found myself getting really bored of the same thing every day. Touring is very methodical, very militant. You do purposefully do same thing every day. So I went in a rental place. I rented a Neumann U47 from a little rental company, and started a conversation up with the person. And she said, hey, my boss is looking for someone to run this thing. And so I wanted to get off the road. At the time, I thought I wanted to be a traditional studio recording engineer. And so I thought, well, this will be a good way before I spend my life on the road. I kind of saw the road as a means to an end to get to Nashville, but I never really saw that as my career path. So kind of jumped over, ran this rental company. So now I'm getting to touch and play with all this expensive recording gear that I previously only dreamed of, that I never actually got to play with. So I'm still recording it at night, but I'm in Nashville now, and I'm taking all this gear home at night. And more importantly, I'm meeting all the guys that are doing that.
The acts, the producers, the studios, and an actor or producer or would say, hey, we need a microphone or a reverb or a delay or something. And you would take it from the shop and take it to the wherever they needed it.
Yeah, I would take it to them. And what's interesting about that, Ed, is this would have been the mid-'90s. If I would have walked in your control room, you probably wouldn't have noticed me. But in those 2 or 3 minutes that appeared, I was just walking in and dropping off a piece of gear. I was taking pictures. I was making notes. Oh, that's Ed Seay. That's Dan Huff on guitar. That's so-and-so artist, And, of course, they're giving you the billing information, so you know what label, the producer, who the engineer is. And just making notes.
Actually,
who are the guys?
Actually, I did notice you the first time the first time I think you walked in the control room that I was in there. Not initially, but then you said, "Hey, there's your 1176," and I said, "Yeah, I've got a couple of them over there." And he said, "Yeah, I see they're blackfaces. Are they revision A, revision D, revision F?" And I went, "Whoa, okay."
Yeah.
And so that was you made an impression.
I loved, look, this was my hobby. When I was working at that sound company, we would get these monthly used gear newsletters. I would plow through them, this is this piece of gear. This is how much it cost. So-and-so. I loved, and I was always that kid. I read every credit on every record. I knew who these people were.
Mm-hmm.
I knew these studios. They were making these records that were turning me on. And, so when I moved to Nashville, I knew who these people were when, I started to meet them. And I think that makes an impression,
Of course. And you probably,
people are always intrigued.
Early on, you probably realized, okay, this piece rents all the time. This rents never. And this one's somewhere in between.
Right. So, I ran that company for about a year and a half. And, what was interesting about that is, this company, the lady, she didn't own her inventory. She would sublease it. For example, she would know all the gear that you had. And if someone called and asked for that piece of gear, she might pick up the phone and call you and say, hey, Ed, are you using your GML EQ today? And you would say, go ahead, come get it. So, let's say that piece of gear rented for $100 a day. Well, she would give you $75 for that day keep 25. And, you know, it was a good deal for both parties. The problem with her business model is she never owned her gear, which I thought was insane. You know, the great thing for me was I was the guy answering the phone. So I knew what was lighting the phone up and what wasn't.
Right.
So fast forward, I started Rack and Roll. We're at like 1997. Started a company, quit my job, started a company, and bought my first house in the same week.
Yikes.
And I had no money. You know, I mean, I come from a family of school teachers, so there was no capital investment. You know, so but I just one by one, I started. What's the biggest piece of gear people are renting? Okay, save up to 25% on renting someone else's. Don't pay yourself. You know, just bare essentials. And then I would go buy that piece of gear. So what would happen is all of a sudden I'm making 100%, which would help me save up money quicker to buy that next piece of gear.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow you blink and 23 years flies by. I'm still doing that, you know, so.
Yeah. And
yeah,
you plowed your money back in, kept growing the company. And then you wound up with a really excellent and boutique rental company. It's Rack and Roll Audio, and
right.
You don't have 15 of every piece. You have 2 or 3 of every piece in the best condition. You know, so it's kind of like Noah's Ark of gear.
You know, we try to have 2 of things that people like.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, and so that served you well. That was so that's the rental company that you own, and you're still doing a few recordings and different things. But how did what was the transition that brought you to live recording?
Live recording. Well, you know, that was interesting. So what was happening is, you know, people were coming in and renting these digital multi-tracks, these D88s. It was an 8-track digital recorder, and you could slave them together. So, you know, people were coming in and renting those, and occasionally they would want to do a live recording. And so we would rent them these machines and mic pre's and send them out the door with a bunch of racks of gear and cables, and they would get to the job and, you know, wire it together and cross their fingers. And so this started happening more and more. And the guy that was, you know, running my company for me at the time just started telling people like, hey, you should just hire my boss to do this for you. You know, I'm basically telling them what to do. And so, yeah, then we just started doing it ourselves. And, you know, at the time we were just doing what I call a capture, right? That's where
now what is a
showing
capture?
up. Yeah, so in the broadcast world, if you hear that term, a capture, all that is I mean, you're just capturing the raw audio, you know. Back then it was always analog. So we're putting an analog split, you know, so imagine the mic on the stage getting our feed that way. So, you know, imagine the microphone coming into this 3-way splitter, and it essentially just splits that signal to recording, to front of house, to monitors.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, with my knowledge that I'd learned there in Midland, Texas, I knew you needed a transformer isolated split, you know, that way you don't have any hums and buzzes. And, you know, people would try all kinds of crazy ways to get that split. But having the touring background, I kind of knew the best way to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, for years, we're just going in and doing those raw captures where I'm recording the audio, no EQ, just the microphone to a mic pre to tape. And, you know, then I'm handing those files over, and someone else is mixing it and doing whatever with that. And, you know, that was at the time we were using like D88s and hard disk recorder called Radar. So, you know, there really wasn't a way to do a good rough mix, right? So then Pro Tools came in to the picture. And, you know, Pro Tools used to be incredibly unreliable. So it took a long time for us to get our confidence up where we felt comfortable recording a 2-hour show. Most of the studio guys that were using Pro Tools were recording, 2 to 4 minutes of 48 tracks at a time. We're trying to record, a 2-hour show nonstop without dropping out.
Yeah, good luck.
It's easy. It's easy to do now, but at the time we were, multiple drives, 24 tracks per drive. So that got better and better. And then I remember when this turned. This was a major pivot turn in how we do live recordings. We were recording an artist named Randy Travis, and again, this is always a common thread with me. I was getting bored standing there. You get your level set, you hit record, your work's kind of done. And the hardest thing in the world for me to do is just nothing, stand there. So I kind of started mixing on Pro Tools, while we're recording. And, my assistant at the time, we'd done a ton of shows together. He thought I was nuts. Of course, we had a backup recorder. Redundancy has always been part of my process, a fail-safe, if you will. That way, if Pro Tools crashed, we've got this other machine running. So, it didn't feel reckless. So, a lot of times you would do a rough mix while recording was happening, and that would get printed to the cameras on a video shoot. Let's say that this was a video shoot, right? So on that Randy Travis show, I had it pretty mixy, and that print was going to the camera. And so what happened was they started editing that, and the director called and said, "Hey, this actually sounds pretty good. Do you want to finish it?" And I can't tell you, that was a major light bulb moment, right? Because I think previously I was just waiting for someone to ask me without taking any initiative to show someone what my abilities were, and that's very important for young people to understand is, to be assertive carefully at the right time. Had I not done that, and, I was trying to print a mix to that camera that would stand up. And, that was the next turning point. Now I'm a mixer and we're mixing to picture, yeah.
Does, now the redundancy thing, that's a lesson that a lot of people learn the hard way. You go out with one recorder, and, you hope it works. It's like, and if it doesn't, you're kind of sunk. Did you ever early on get bitten by not having double and triple redundancy, which I do know that you use?
Yeah, we did. I've got a great story about that. This format we were using at the time this happened, Radar, was very stable. It never crashed. It never crashed on us ever, actually. However, we were recording Dierks Bentley. It was like very early on in his career. They were doing a pub crawl, Capitol Records was, and they had Demumbrian Street closed off. And it was an underplay. By then, Dierks was starting to become a pretty big act. But anyway, he's playing at this bar, and they had brought in this big PA. We're in record. We're about 3-4 songs in, and power goes out. Boom. Everything goes down. Well, what do you think happened, right?
Your recorder shut down. Yeah.
It went down, and we didn't have a backup. We get the power back on. We get and record. We go home to the shop the next day, and guess what? We don't have those first 4 songs. At the time, nobody had that thought. Now there's workarounds. So after, I think it was like, and this amount probably goes up every time I tell this story, but I feel like it was like $3,500, $4,000 later, a drive recovery company recovered those 4 songs. And 2-3 weeks later, I handed over the file, just like, nothing had happened. So
it came out of your pocket, though.
It came out of my pocket. It was an expensive lesson. So that's when I bought the $1,500 battery backup, right? So if the power goes down now, we have these battery backups that keep the computers up long enough to hit save.
Because an artist that's fast on his feet would say, okay, hey, we lost the power, but let's do a sing-along anyway, and let's start clapping and sing. But you couldn't record that. And I think
you can't record it.
In the early days of some of this hard disk, recording, if you didn't stop the recorder, it just says you didn't get anything, as opposed to automatic backups, or it's saying, well, you got it up to here, but it wasn't always that. They didn't think of that stuff back then either, I guess.
No. And so, battery backup became a matter of the process, and redundant recording. That's when we learned both of those lessons. And, around that time too, it was kind of a crazy thing we were doing. We would wait till someone hired us to record something, and we would spend a few days building a rig, testing it. And, a lot of D-sub cables, no multi-connector. It's kind of a mess. We never left it hooked up. And my rationale at the time was, well, if somebody wants to rent this recorder, I'm going to pull it out and rent it. The problem is we weren't systematic. Your system is only as good as you've built, right? So, nowadays we have pre-built rigs. We can change them, but we don't, like our 64 input rig, I'll take that out to do a 24 input show. I don't want to pull a piece of gear out. I don't want to change a connector. I don't, if it's working, why would you compromise that? But we hadn't learned that lesson yet either.
Right.
That came later.
So at this point, though, you were still renting gear, renting rigs, but using your rig and selling gear. But at some point, you just figured, well, I'm going to take a deep dive into this, because Pro Tools did kind of catch up and got more reliable. And
it started sounding good.
And so do you still rent rigs like that?
We do. I mean, to my close circle of engineer buddies, I'll rent. We have a A, B, and C rig. I'll rent my A rig out to my, a few of my good friends, but for the most part, it's kind of proprietary, right? It's me, the assistant, and the rig, and my process. It's kind of a turnkey thing.
Yeah.
My rig is just a collection of gear. If you know what you're doing, it'll work for you. But somebody could go take a picture of it and put it together, but that you may or may not get the same result, right? What we do now is it's a process of, it's very systematic, right? From how we plug things in, where we locate it, how we lay our cables out, where we lay our cables out, communication before the date. It's all, when you hire us to do remote now, it's, 20 something years of doing it that you're getting for free, basically.
Well, now in the early days, you probably loaded up the station wagon or the SUV. Then you got a truck, and didn't you a while back get an RV, or not an RV, but a remote truck?
Yeah. No, it's an RV. So, as the business kept growing, now we're mixing while we're recording. And then I had hooked up with this network at the time called HDNet, and started producing a lot of live concerts for them, for like DVDs and stuff. Mm-hmm. So now doing a rough mix during the recording has kind of became a thing that is expected. And so, a lot of times we're in a dressing room. We might be in monitor world. Sometimes, we find ourselves in noisy environments. And so, yeah, this last year I kind of got tired of that and bought an RV. And I refer to it as an RV because, I mean, that's what it is. It gives me a place to listen to, right? The remote flight pack is still part of our process. The RV just allows me a place to park and escape the room, get out of the room, where I can actually be in an environment where I have a better chance to hear and quite honestly, relax, have air conditioning, have a place to sit, kind of get out of the venue.
Now, when you pull, let's say with your RV, if you pull up at a venue and, you know, normally you park in the back where the big trucks park, and you pull in, you run your cables, you interface with usually the live PA and do a split. Now, do you come out of the monitor mixer, or do you come out of the split at the?
So usually I'm always interfacing with the monitor guy, analog or digital. He mans the split, and you know it's rare now. Unfortunately, when we have analog dates, we're taking an analog split. It's still my preferred way. It really has nothing to do with sound so much as control. When I take an analog split and I hit my pre's, I control the level that we're recording. When I take a MADI feed, or Dante is starting to become a thing, typically it's MADI now. Well, I'm gain sharing. So I'm kind of at the mercy of, you know, how much gain the monitor and front of house guy have put on that. So, you know, that's not fun. You know.
But with 120, how big are some of the gigs, the Zach Brown stuff, the Sam Hunt stuff? A lot of inputs on those shows.
Yeah. So that is a very important point. If it's over 64 inputs, I'm really not interested in taking analog, even if it's an option. I have clients now. You mentioned Zach Brown. That's one of my clients where they're upwards to like 112, maybe more than that. But I know multiple times it's been 112 inputs. Big band, lots of microphones, a lot of mic positions, and you know, that's a lot. Sam's closer to like 60, you know, 56, somewhere around there. But you know, we did a Demi Lovato show that was it was over 96 inputs. So yeah, a lot of those big tours that go out now, it's 96 is no longer a crazy number. When we started, 32 always got it done, and then I built a 48 channel system, and I thought, oh, we'll never hit that. And then bands started giving me 48 inputs, and so by the time I put audience mics out, I was at 56, and I thought we would have a good run with that. And then it became 64. So you see where this is going. It's just because, you know, typically something we haven't hit on is, so I'm taking the signals off the stage and recording those. That's one part of three. The second part is record the audience. And when I say record the audience, that's, you know, the clappers and the woo-woos and all that. You have to record that. The third part of the process is the room, the ambience, the tone, if you will, of the room. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, those are microphones that we're putting out ourselves that are just coming to the record world. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that's a whole process I could talk about if you're interested in that.
Well, how many
I get those sounds.
How many audience or ambience mics do you normally do, like at a big venue, at the Brian Wilson show, or a show at a even larger venue? How many do you normally put out?
So you know, it's always going to be at least 8 inputs or more. if like the Brian Wilson, we were able to record the 50th anniversary of Pet Sounds last year. That was fun, and that was at the Ryman Auditorium, which is my favorite venue, and anywhere to record a show. So we'll take mics that are up in the ceiling. I'll put mics out across the stage. I've had as many as like 12 to 16 channels of audience. Mm-hmm. You really can't have enough, and the mixer can always turn those off if they're not adding to anything, but you typically can't have enough audience, and mm-hmm. it's funny still to this day when I'm advancing a show and talking about this, people will say, well, make sure that you put some audience mics up. And I kind of chuckle because that we're kind of known for going to ridiculous lengths of putting microphones everywhere to get the sound of the show.
Yeah. Otherwise it's like, well, you did a show, but there was nobody watching. So it doesn't work. There's no interaction. It doesn't sound live, even though it is.
If we do our job properly, I'm trying to put you in the best seat in the house where you feel like you're sitting in the audience and hearing a great show. We're all music fans. I think any of us that ever got into this, you're a music fan. And I always approach all this as like, hey, I'm the music fan that is getting to record this. And I want to make it sound good for me in the audience.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, what sample rate? What sample rate do you control that, or does the manager of how does that come out? Figured out?
So those conversations usually happen kind of early on. If I'm the mixer, then I'm kind of able to do what I think is appropriate, which I always feel like a high sample rate is the appropriate approach. Does it sound better? Sometimes, maybe not. The thing that does is it kind of takes it off the table, right? If you just record at high sample rate, then you don't think about it. You don't wonder what you've lost. Most people that'll try to talk you out of that haven't built, systems big enough to record 96 inputs at 96K. And right. So, but I will say when it's analog, it doesn't matter. We can set the sample rate wherever we want. If I'm taking MADI, they're probably clocking, they're providing the clock right down their MADI stream. I could reclock it and change the sample rate, but typically every tour that's out for the most part is clocking their console at 96, and so we just take it at 96. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that does make a more difficult workflow, but hey, if better is better,
yeah,
you do it.
No one argues about. In fact, even in record making, the standards have gone up. You used to see a lot of 44.1 and still some 48 and different situations like that. But now the standards are getting higher. And to your point, there was a jazz project I was doing, and it was totally on me as to what do I do 48, do I do 88.2 or 96? And I decided it would make good sense to just record at high sample rate, 96, and that way no one would snob the sample rate
right.
Well, 48, are you kidding? It would be,
right.
Okay, let's move on, because that's not an issue anymore,
Yep.
Well, you've worn all these hats. You talked about all the way back being when I played in bands, we had a guy called Pac-Man, and his job was packing the truck. He knew how to pack that truck. Yeah. You've done that. You've wired some, with soldering iron and constructed systems. You're a drummer. You've played, so you know how to tune drums. You're familiar with all the gear. Excuse me. You wear a lot of hats. Has there ever been a circumstance where all those hats really came into play to kind of save the day?
Sure.
In your experience? Or?
Yeah. I've got a story about that. So, a couple of years ago, I realized one of the best ways to serve your client is to offer anything that they need. If you know something about something that needs addressing, jump in, do it, right? The old school thought was kind of like, hey, you're here to do this. Don't get out of your comfort zone. But, you do enough of those recordings, well, hey, this is going to be a problem. The drums don't sound good. Like, that's going to be a problem later on. I could sit here and just hit record and say, well, the drums sounded bad. Or, I know how to tune drums. I'm a drummer. I'm super passionate about gear things. And so if that's called for and that's appropriate, I'll approach the drummer and be like, hey, can I mind if I show you something? And, I found, this trick. And so here's a good story about that. I was with Sam Hunt, this guy that's a client of mine, and we were doing Good Morning America. And, Sam was a new artist. He was just having his first hit, and this was his second TV date ever. So, all those morning shows, it's a real early load in. It's like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning you go in. And so the morning of that show, I'd come down to the lobby and his tour manager's there. And, I kind of look around. It's just he and I. I'm like, okay, where's everybody else? I was assuming there was a road crew, right? And he goes, oh, yeah, man, it's just me and you. So, I very quickly, I thought, well, it's not going to do me any good to moan about the fact, that I'm going to be helping him hump the gear. He didn't know better. He was green, and he just thought, So we jumped in. We're humping cases across Times Square. We get there. There's a rental drum kit. It sounds terrible. So, I'm tuning drum heads. I'm laying the cables out around the drum kit. I mean, typically this is stuff a broadcast mixer would never have to concern themselves with, right? Like, you're the broadcast mixer, But, my greatest asset that day was all of those abilities, knowing how to patch and lay out a stage. And, the tour manager didn't know anything at the time. So it was basically me, right? I made that happen. Got our drum kit up, our playback rig up, got everything tested. I honestly did very little mixing that day. The ABC mixer basically mixed that show, but my worth that day was making it happen, right? And,
you were expecting a white gloves gig, and it turned out
white gloves, as they call it.
Turns out it was
white gloves gig that rarely. Even when you think you're doing a white gloves gig, there's always something. So, honestly, that was a great reminder of, hey, if you've hired me and I have a skill set that is helpful, you get everything. Any story, any trick, any whatever I've ever learned about anything, and that comes in handy all the time. Working with young, bands, a lot of times you're dealing with side guys that don't have good tone, that maybe don't have mic technique at all. Maybe, maybe there's a monitor engineer that, doesn't know how to do a good monitor mix. And there's an appropriate way to handle all that stuff,
Well,
it's one-on-one.
It seems like
Go ahead.
Most of what you're, in addition to going out and capturing these major label artists in big venues, small venue, anywhere, more often than not only do you record the show, you rough mix the show, and then usually go back and do the final mix for the show. And that's kind of become a new layer of this onion, I believe.
Yeah, it has. I think when you do stuff long enough and you're just patient, that eventually kind of comes to you. People, you prove yourself, right? Be reliable. And early on, I thought you had to be the best, which I always try to be the best. But what life and all this has taught me is a lot of times that's not the case. I like to think I'm very reliable. I'm going to show up on time.
Mm-hmm.
My gear is going to work, knock on wood. We're going to have tested it. We're going to, you are going to walk away with a file, right? There's no excuses, right? If anything goes wrong, it's 100% my fault.
And you use the triple redundancy, don't you?
Now we're doing triple redundancy just because why not, right? That leaves us with a rig to mix on, a rig to record, and a second record rig as a backup, and so as we're kind of evolving here, the newest trick is we're doing a lot of live to air dates, right, where the capture, the record, really isn't, it's more for archive. A lot of my clients that are hiring me now, we're doing a live to air mix where, let's say if it's Sirius XM, and we're doing a Zach Brown show, it's really more about my mix I'm doing in real time that's going to air. And the recording's just kind of like for archive. We're probably not going to go back and visit that multi-track. You just record it. So that is kind of, that's a culmination of everything. Flying by the seat of your pants,
Garth Brooks,
didn't
you do that to Garth Brooks as well? You did a Sirius XM live stream. I mean, it was going out live as it was being recorded and straight up to the bird, I believe.
Yeah. And I enjoy that. It's a very pressure cooker situation. It makes it fun. It makes the guy that gets bored easily. It definitely keeps him on his toes. There's a lot of pressure. I don't feel that like some people would. Coming up in the live sound world, there was always that immediacy of everything had to work. Of course, now that the audience has grown, when you're doing that, there's a much bigger audience. But I love that, and it's kind of a perfect marriage of everything that I feel like I'm built for. And so it's exciting. I mean, live music is exciting, and it's not perfect, but it sure is fun.
And also, right now, it's with the recording environment where sales are down, but live is the main. That's the main moneymaker.
Yeah. And so, giving people that live experience in real time, and trying to deliver, fidelity, it's fun, challenging. We've had everything that can go wrong has happened multiple times. We've learned how to deal with it. And every gig I do, I still learn a lesson,
Yeah.
I can't tell you how important a process is. Almost, what touring taught me, it's very militant, right? Like, this is how we do this. We do it the same way, and there are reasons for that. And, once you develop a great process, I try not to deviate from it. I'll try something new, but we're gonna test it before we try it,
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's people may or may not even notice distortion that is not your fault or some minor live occurrence, but they will certainly notice if you don't have a file to turn in. I mean, that's the worst. Right. It's like it's all on you. It's like, what, so.
It's kind of the ultimate stressor, but I love it. I'm up for the challenge.
Where do you think technically this is going? We're up to 96, 88.2 or 96. We've got all these inputs. A lot of these acts have live playback stuff, augmented sound. Do you record that as well?
We do. And the playback thing has really just kind of started the last 8 to 10 years, It's a big thing now. I did a, very current, very popular country artist this last year, and they had 32 inputs of playback.
32.
32. I mean, that's a lot. That's and we don't have to get into what Rob thinks, if it's necessary or not. They've decided it's necessary, and I'm there to serve them. A positive about those playback tracks are if I'm trying to put together a live to air mix, the snobby music fan puts that to the side. It's very happy to have that, because I can push that up, get my live vocals and live instruments going, and pretty quickly have something that, that'll sound very representative of the record that they've made. Typically you'll see 8 to 12 inputs of stuff. Sometimes it's well managed, level wise, song to song. The pros have that trimmed out, and you should be able to, they're typically always stereo pairs. You should be able to push those up to unity and just kind of park them. And, they should be able to sit and be static for the most part.
What about,
if it's done right?
What about, let's say the show typically is at, let's say, 8 o'clock downbeat for the concert. It's going to start at 8 o'clock. What time do you and your crew roll in? How do you gauge that?
Yeah, typically as early as they'll let us in, right? We don't want to get there and be in anyone's way. So typically I'll advance that with a production manager about what time he would like us to come in. And typically I'll show up, 30 minutes, an hour before that, just where we're on site, right? That way, kind of just check in and be like, hey, we're here. We won't roll any cases around and get in your way, but it's a comfort thing, a respect thing. But I like to get there. There's nothing. I've never had too much time at a gig. Like, I will be working, right? If I'm set up quicker and I'm ready to record sound check, and if it's a live to air, I'll record sound check and I'll be working on my mix right up until we go live, if it's a live to air. So get there early. It buys me more time later on in the day, which just makes it better. A lot of times we're doing 2 or 3 acts, which that gets tricky if you're doing 2 to 3 acts live to air. Are
a lot of those what I call, oh, by the way? Oh, by the way, yes. As long as you're here, always. Can you record always. This babe?
Rarely is that advanced. It's like a lot of times day of, like, oh, hey, we're going to take so-and-so, up and coming act as well.
You're here, right? I mean, why don't you just do it? You're here. Yeah.
We do it and we smile, but I don't like that, because I feel like it cheapens the headliner. If I wasn't doing the opener, that's more time I would be spending on the file of the headliner. And a lot of times you can just take a front of house mix or something for the opener. And, I want to make sure the person that's hired me, that is my check is coming from, that ultimately is who I'm there to serve. And so, but yeah, you just try to have a good attitude and go with whatever is thrown at you. And that's how you find work the next time.
Do you, is it standard practice to be there early enough to record the sound check, and that way you can pretty much rough in your levels, your mix, your pans, or whatever, so that when the real show happens, you're already sitting at a real good place? I mean, that's a great idea.
Yeah, that's standard practice for us. No one taught me that. We just kind of started doing that, right? Like it just kind of made sense. And, like I was saying earlier, a lot of times we're in environments where you maybe can't hear real well. So, when you're mixing that sound check, typically there's not a band on stage. And so I'll reference, other recordings to make sure my bottom end is right, to make sure my top is right. And then once the show starts, I just trust it.
Yeah.
We don't, there's a bunch of extra low end rolling around, but you just ignore it. You know with certainty, like, hey, I was in a good spot with the kick and the bass. I'm not going to move them because it feels heavy or light, like, but yeah, we've gotten pretty good at, on headphones a lot of the times, or, speakers, but a lot of times it's headphones, of just trusting that. And, we have so many good tools now to help us reference where we are.
Well, what about, another question that comes to mind is, so you roll in, well, actually, before you roll in, you've had conversations. Okay, we're going to play at Red Rocks, or we're going to play at some venue somewhere. And who are you interfacing with at that point on the phone when it's you're not bidding the gig? You've already got the gig, but it's the logistics of who are you talking to? The manager?
Yeah, well, typically the manager kind of okays the expenses, and then you get passed off to, a production manager who will tell you what you need to know about being there, credentials. Then for the technical stuff, you'll get passed off. Typically, it's the monitor engineer.
Mm-hmm.
And, hey, I was that guy. So I know that guy pretty well and what he's thinking. And I kind of go in, try to be very respectful, right? I go in knowing I'm an inconvenience to his day, right? Like, I don't want his day to be any longer because I'm there, right? And I know all those little tricks because I was him. And so it's, you don't assume anything. You ask a lot of questions. Hey, where would you like me to get my power? Where would you like me to put these cables down, right? Because what you don't want to put your cables down and cover somebody up, and then, at the loadout, they're cussing you, and, if 5 minutes in a loadout, it doesn't seem like a big deal, but it's a big deal. These guys have it down to a science how quick they want to be, have their stuff on the truck. So, we're thinking about all of those things. We're making no assumptions. You're asking permission for everything you do, and, it's the right thing to do, and it's a sign of respect. And, typically after about a half hour of that kind of behavior, the crustiest guy in the world is ready to do whatever he can to help you, and I kind of learned that from seeing a lot of people, and still to this day see a lot of my peers go at it kind of a different way. And it doesn't yield good results.
And at the show,
for them.
When the show is not actually underway, but you're at the site, at the venue, is that the main guy you're talking to, the monitor guy, or does the manager ever come up and get in your ear? Or
yeah, typically if I'm doing my job right, I always tell them, hey, day of, you hopefully won't even know I'm there, right? Because we've talked about all these things, and I'm going to have a couple of questions, but I really pride ourselves on being a ghost, like, because I want everyone to work and just go about it like it's a normal day, and it not to feel like a live recording's happening. When we do sound check, a lot of times I will say, hey, can we do a slightly slower sound check? And that might be, instead of listening to the snare drum for 5 seconds, can we listen to it for 10 seconds? Right.
Yeah.
Which is still really fast, but you know what I'm saying? Outside of that, I want it to be a smooth and fast day for them. And we're pretty good at that at this point.
So when people call Rack and Roll Audio, most of the time, there's still the rental side that, but most of the time they are calling for live recording / mixing situations for broadcast or concert footage or.
Well, to be honest with you, out of necessity, wearing these hats, we still rent a fair amount of gear. We still sell a fair amount of gear. We're doing a fair amount of live recordings and post-production mixing, and again, getting back to Rob gets bored, so he's always wearing a lot of hats. That actually is a blessing. But in times where one area gets slow, typically another is rocking, right? So, we built a couple recording studios this last year. We sold a couple large format consoles. We went and did a bunch of live recordings and live broadcast, and there's a good living in all that, and I'm thankful that my livelihood doesn't hang on one thing that might go out of favor. But again, that's always been my personality. I'll never do one thing exclusively. It's just not my personality set.
And it seems like you have you've gotten really comfortable wearing a lot of hats, but you never have been afraid to pivot and say, okay, I'm where I am, but it looks like if I take a left or a right, this may be the way to go. A lot of people, I think, get stuck in one system, one situation, one piece of gear, and that's where they are, and that's where they're going to stay. And a lot of times they're missing out on good opportunities elsewhere because you never know.
Constantly looking for opportunities and paying attention, trying to figure out where is this crazy business going and how we might fit into it, right? And it's a great thing about being a small business is you're not the Titanic. We can move very quickly. If somebody calls and asks for a piece of gear and we don't have it, I'm probably a dealer for it, or I can buy it. And if they don't need it for a couple days, we can buy it. And a couple days later, they're walking out the door. Now, they didn't know. I just said yes, right? Always say yes.
Yeah.
Just say yes and then figure it out. I mean, that's what I've been doing since day one. It's a lot harder to get people to light up that phone. So if that phone lights up and you can help them in any remote way, do so.
Yeah.
Because the hard part is them calling. The easy part is saying yes, figuring it out. So that's what I've been doing for 23 years.
Well, Rob,
saying yes.
It's a fascinating path and a fascinating business that you're in. And thank you so much for taking the time to
thanks for having me.
Yeah, talk about this stuff, because it's like a lot of people have no idea. They know they see a video but they don't know how the music happens or how it actually gets recorded or this job niche. And so thank you very much for taking the time to do that. And thank you.
Thanks for having me. And if I can just leave your students with something real quick.
Sure.
Man, I just want to say, it's weird times right now. It's weird times in the music business. Be determined, meet people, make notes, follow up. People like Ed and myself, we want to help you. We want to give you information. We want to see you succeed. And, hey, if this kid from West Texas can feed his family and do it for 23 years, you can do it. If you ever have thoughts about doing something else, you might not be cut out for it. But if this is all you want to do and all you think about doing, you can do it. And, rockandrollaudio.com, you can find my email, just like Ed and everyone else. If you have a question and want to ask us, find me, and good luck with your path.
That's great, Rob. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, Ed. We'll see you guys.